Okay, well, finally, we get here. Hello. We're gonna talk about the brain today. It's one of my favorite organs, so watch out. Here, I try to explain what I've learned and trying to understand of how to outsmart my own brain. So in this video today, we're gonna learn about the basic nervous system structure. We're gonna learn about the protections that the nervous system needs. It's a very delicate organ. We're gonna learn about the development. And then we're going to go into the cerebrum, or what we call the conscious brain for us. And we'll talk about the different areas and different lobes. And from there, we're going to go deeper into the inner workings of the brain. And we end up down at the spinal cord, more or less. When we look at basic nervous system functioning, we're going to go back to the negative feedback loop. So we're going to look where we have a receptor that detects a change on the inside or the outside of the body, and then sends a signal, or what we call here a sensory stimuli. Oops, mistake here. Sensory stimuli. Here we go. Goes and brings that into the spinal cord or the brain. That's the central nervous system. And there we're going to process that situation. We're going to look at what's up with what came in, and at the end, the brain or the spinal cord will have a result, and that result is sent via a motor nerve into an effector organ. Here, that's a muscle, and that muscle will contract. It's always a neuron, a muscle, or a gland. I can delete that. That's good. When we look at the structural understanding of the nervous system, we have two main parts. We have a brain and the spinal cord. That's the CNS, so we call that the central nervous system. That's basically our command center. It's like a computer. And then we have the peripheral nervous system, and those are all the nerves that come out of the central nervous system, and they basically connect the brain to the body. Structurally, we can divide the brain output division any further. So when we look at the brain here, this is actually a little bit of an interesting looking chart, but I like it because here we got the top, we got the CNS, the central nervous system, right here, and the arrow red going down is exit, so that's motor output. The blue is input, whatever comes in sensory. So here we basically have the sensory afferent division that brings information up into the central nervous system, into the brain and the spinal cord. On the right side here, we have the motor or the efferent division. And we further then divide that division with the many efferents that go to the stimuli of the skeletal muscle. See here? Skeletal muscle. So that's where this division goes. That's all the stuff going to the skeletal muscles. We call that the somatic nervous system because soma refers to body. So somatic nervous system is the nervous system goes to our body, and when we touch ourselves, for the most part, we're touching muscle stuff. We're not touching internal organ. That is referred to the visceral nervous system. So that is actually the other part of the motor division. That's the autonomic nervous system. And that nervous system, that's right here, autonomic nervous system, ANS. And that thing works automatically. So we don't think about it. So you can see here it says involuntary. So that's the involuntary system. That influences cardiac, it influences smooth muscles, and it influences glands. That nervous system is responsible to maintaining the constant internal milieu, which means the internal environment, and that's called homeostasis. So what this nervous system concerns itself with is to, make sure that the organs have enough oxygen, for example. So the heart pumps a little faster or a little slower, depending on how much the tissue needs are, or the breathing goes a little deeper, a little more shallow. We then further divide that into a sympathetic division, and that is known as a fight-flight. That's up here. You can see that sympathetic division. That tells you, all these things tell you what that division does down here. So you can read up on that a little bit. And then we have a parasympathetic division on the opposite spectrum. Most of the time we're in between, so some processes, depends on what we're doing. And a parasympathetic is known as the rest and digest system. So that's sort of when we relax and when we chill out. And that tells you all the stuff that happens when that is activated. That's pretty cool stuff. The brain and the spinal cord are very, very delicate organs. They need to be well protected by a bony wall. So the skull here is pretty hard, helmety type, bony wall. And down below in the spinal cord, we're going to have the spine itself, the bones. We have also then below that, in deeper to the bones, we have three membranes. They're known as meninges, and they protect the brain and the spinal cord even further. The dura mater, see here, dura mater, dura means thick, and fibrous is a fibrous thick membrane that adheres firmly to the inside of the bone, the periosteum, and that's kind of like a leather bag around the brain and the spinal cord. Deep to that, we have the arachnoid mater, and arachnoid actually means spider, and so that means the spidery mater. That's more delicate, and it's a membrane that is very interesting because it's got these septa. See here, these septa. It's called septa. They're these little things here, these things that go down. They're like fingers projecting or spider legs projecting inward and surrounding the whole brain. And through that process, it's kind of like they prevent extra movement of the brain, so it doesn't push against the bony wall. But also, it's kind of like little small springs that absorb shock when we get a hit from the outside or something like that. So that's kind of cool. And then on the innermost area, actually right here, you can see it right here on the brain, right here. That thing is the pia mater, right there, pia mater. Mater means mother, so that's, And that's a very thin and sensitive layer that adheres straight to the brain and spinal cord, and it has a lot of capillaries in it, which makes sense, feeding the brain from the outside that way. Cerebrospinal fluid is secreted into the subarachnoid space, and the subarachnoid space is right here. That's the subarachnoid space. It's below the arachnoid mater, which is the second one. See, then on the outside one is the dura mater, and then that's the bone. There we go. That's basically that. Well, then let's get to the development. That's a very interesting situation. The nervous system appears on the day 18th of embryonic development. I mean, at that point, that's very early. That's not even 3 weeks after conception. At that point, though, visualize a leaf, a flat leaf, and basically the leaf is here. You can just see a little bit of that flatness, that leaf, and that's basically cluster of cells that arrange themselves that way. And that's us early on. And so from there, the area of the leaf where the stem will be, so that's, the center piece here, it will fold in on itself like that, and it makes a notochord, actually, that is called, or we can also call that a neural plate. Oh, and I mean a neural tube, sorry about that. The neural plate is actually that leaf. The neural plate is that flat leaf. Then the neural tube is that notochord that folds inward, and then that becomes the spinal cord down here. But on top of it, we're gonna get these embryonic brain vesicles, these primary brain vesicles, and those then form the brain, essentially. So when we look at that, that's a front view right here. We see the top big one right here. That is actually going to be the forebrain. And the forebrain is sort of our regular conscious thinking brain. Here we can see it from the side. That forebrain is right here. And you can see that in the little embryo that gets created where that's at. In us, the whole thing here, that's the forebrain. That's the big piece. That's why we're supposed to be smart. Now, we're trying to figure that out. But and then below that, we have the midbrain. And that's more rudimentary stuff. And then we have the hindbrain, also more rudimentary stuff. Again, front view, side view, midbrain right here, mesencephalon, and then the hindbrain right down in here. Rome encephalon is the hindbrain. And then also we got the midbrain right here. You can see that in our adult brain or mature, grown-up brain. And then the hindbrain is below the pons, which is further down at the medulla, then the spinal cord comes here. And then this brain back here, that's very interesting, that's our cauliflower brain, and that is has a nice name, huh? And that is made here for us to balance. It's a very, very important structure that we're going to get to. The cerebrum, which is the weakly outer part of the brain, is made of a thin outer shell called the cortex. Oops. There you go. See the thin outer shell here. So that's the cerebrum. That's actually a cross section straight through the head from the side to side, from ear to ear, basically, right? And this thing here, that's that thin outer part that's called the cortex. And that's an area where we have neural cell bodies. And the cell bodies are the neuron's metabolic center, which means they are the ones that make decisions and initiate impulses. We call this, it's about 2 to 5 millimeters thick, so that's half a centimeter. It's pretty good size. We can see that with the naked eye. We call that area that is made of gray matter. So that's the cerebral cortex that's made of gray matter. See here, gray matter. And it's great because it looks a little bit more darker or browner than the one on the inside. And the inside is interesting. We have this inner white core as mainly myelinated nerve fibers. And that's an area where we conduct impulses. So the sensations are made up on top here, and then the nerve go inward, and that's the nerve fibers that we can see that. So these are basically cell extension neurons that reach each other to connect to each other, and then that's neural pathways. And so we need to have these nerve fibers, so to speak, insulated so they from one another, so they don't, cross fire with one another. So they're separate entities, and that we do that with a myelin sheet, and that's a phospholipid bilayer. Remember that phospholipid bilayer thing that is around the cell membrane? And that's basically creating a little hydrophobic film or a little fat layer around the neuron, and so that's kind of cool. And so that part looks whiter, so we call that the white matter, essentially. That's why. And then we also have several bilateral gray nuclei, we call them gray nuclei, on the inside deep in the brain. And those are basically clusters of cell bodies. Here they're colored a little bit, so there's some here, there's some here, there's some here, as you can see that. And that brings us further in then. The white matter is in nerve pathways that connect areas of the brain together. So fibers connecting cell bodies in the same hemisphere we have. So we have to basically then have these things, some pathways go from area to area in the same area, same hemisphere. So this is like here, this is this picture right here. Oh, that looks great, huh? You can't see that. But those we call association fibers. And then we got some fibers that move from side to side. They move across, they go right here. You can see those here, they go across. So they go right here actually. And that structure right here is known as the corpus callosum. So we call those commissural fibers. And then we got some fibers, and they have to move up and down the spine. Well, actually up and down, in the CNS. So they go up and down here in the brain. And we know those are projection fibers.